Welcome to Islamic Life Coach School Podcast. Apply tools that you learn in this podcast and your life will be unrecognizably successful. Now your host, Dr. Kamal Akhtar.
Hello everyone. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. Today is part 4 of the series in Ramadan, where we talk about your operating level, which is what determines how you relate to life. This operating level is measured. In my program, I measure this operating level through an SQ score, or soulful intelligence score. The score represents the wavelength at which you live your life. Low set point narrows your perception, and it narrows your relationship dynamics. High set point expands all of that. Inshallah, currently we are using the month of Ramadan to raise this set point. When your internal operating system upgrades, you're not able to be controlled by others, and you start to understand that your survival through trauma was not evidence of your weakness. It was itself evidence of a high set point in the moment where it mattered the most. Your nervous system at that point made the most intelligent decision it could. It activated fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response in a way that preserved you. That was its design, and that was brilliant. That was your body choosing survival when your conscious choice was limited. But living in perpetual trauma lowers your set point. When your survival mood becomes chronic, the very mechanism that once protected you will begin to narrow your life. In that state, the brain will remain in the state of default, and it will almost always default to survival coding. And because perception is what shapes your experience, you will begin to interpret life through a trauma lens. A low set point narrows perception. When perception narrows, your choice narrows, and when that happens, your relational patterns also narrow. That's how the original trauma gets stronger in your psyche. So far, this has been the summary of the previous parts of the Ramadan series on your consciousness set point. Today, we're going to explore how that shows up in your relationship. We talk about how your energetic wavelength is showing up in your relationship dynamics. Toxic relationships that you often complain about are not sustained only by behavior. That is just a superficial layer. They are sustained by shared operating levels of the people that are in the relationship. Two nervous systems interacting from similar set points will stabilize around that level, whether it is a high or a low set point. When both people are operating from survival coding, the relationship will organize itself around a low set point, which is reactivity, defensiveness, control, avoidance, a lot of emotional dependency and enmeshment. It may look like conflict or incompatibility by behavior, but underneath it all is a different fuel that is your shared operating level. Flight survival response defaults at an operating level in males to become narcissistic adult patterns. Fawn survival response defaults at an operating level in women that become people-pleasing adult patterns. And more often than not, those two attract each other, which is a low set point for both. And as a disclaimer, what I'm mostly discussing in this podcast is relationships outside of abuse, where your safety must be prioritized. So please, as I always say, make sure you are in a safe situation. Then we can look to see how most repeating relational patterns persist because your internal state remains unchanged. If one partner comes from a lens of threat, and the other is avoidant, dismissive, or dominant from their own survival patterns, the toxic dynamic will feed itself. This is why simply leaving a difficult relationship without upgrading your nervous system reproduces the dynamic in another relationship. If the operating system remains the same, the relational outcome, no matter where you go, will reorganize itself around the low set point, meaning you will fall back into the trap of survival patterns of behavior. You may change who you are with, you may change the environment, even the city, but if your set point remains low, you will still interpret through survival. You will still put up with microaggressions, or if you have decided that you're not going to put up with microaggressions anymore, you will deal with them in a way that will weaken the relationship. You will tolerate what matches your internal coding, and you will still react in ways that confirm your old narrative. Raising your set point is what shifts the wavelength that you're living at. And when that happens, your availability also shifts. You become less recruitable for narcissistic abuse, for manipulation, less available for your own perfectionism and people-pleasing. Then relationships reorganize around your new coherence. Either that or they fall apart because they can no longer stay stable since you've given up your old operating level. Upgrading your internal system is what liberates you from the need of controlling others, which is very lucky for you because you can't control them anyways. When you change the level from which you relate, the people you relate to have the invite to change as well. A low SQ makes your suffering sound like it's the more spiritual thing to do. It makes pain and suffering seem more virtuous. This pattern is especially true for women when they're told to be patient in difficult relationships. For Muslim women, the childhood over-attunement that might have been the survival mechanism is told to them that it is the religious thing to do. But all of that is just compliance conditioning. What was adaptive over-attunement that might have saved your life or allowed you the conditional love of your caregiver, or at the very least kept you out of harm's way, now becomes a trap of responsibility because of patriarchal interpretations of the religion. It is what happens when you learn through your low SQ survival pattern that safety can only come from agreeing with everyone else, that being in the perpetual state of self-sacrifice is the Islamic thing to do. Low SQ makes self-abandonment feel spiritual. And when you begin to interpret your life through this endurance as an identity, when you pride yourself on how much you can tolerate, or you measure your virtue by how much discomfort you can absorb without any protest, you are convincing your nervous system that you're made for a low-level life. If you are telling yourself that you are a wasila for a man's healing in your life, that your softness, your patience, your regulation, your suffering will be the conduit through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reforms the man in your life, I want to warn you that this trap is very subtle because it feels noble. I will also warn you that no matter how noble it seems, you cannot take responsibility for someone else's healing if you are operating from a low SQ set point. When your internal system is not regulated, stepping into the role of rescuer will inevitably reactivate your own survival responses. You will overgive, you will overperform, you will take responsibility for other people's emotions that you think you're trying to heal. You will try to regulate their emotions for them, which is not your responsibility to begin with. And when all of that happens, slowly and almost invisibly, your own set point drops. Rescuing someone or helping someone through their own trauma patterns requires an extraordinary internal stability. If your SQ is not close to 75, meaning you do not have consistent access to pause, discernment, and boundaries, you are not anchored in your internal coherence, you will erase yourself in the process of helping somebody else, and you will call it sacrifice. Or worse yet, you will call it your spiritual duty, and you will think this is love. You will give it all sorts of beautiful names when it's none of that. And when you feel depleted, which you eventually will, when you feel resentful and confused because you don't know what happened to you, it's happening because of simple physics of emotional wavelengths. If you do not have strong internal and external resources to keep you anchored and vibrating at high frequencies, you have no business being someone else's rescuer. At a low consciousness set point, you are emotionally recruitable. It makes your nervous system porous to other people's dysregulation. In that state, you will confuse enmeshment and no emotional boundaries with virtue. That state confuses endurance with righteousness. A high SQ, a high consciousness set point, on the other hand, offers you support so that you can love without losing your boundaries. It will let you care for other people without taking on over-responsibility. A high SQ also lets you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not require you to heal another adult, especially if you're not in a position to do so. You're not appointed as everyone else's nervous system regulator. They're adults, they can help themselves if they choose to. Also, let me remind you now what a high set point looks like. At that state, negativity still exists, but it does not dominate your perception. You can hold hardship without turning into a major story about your life. You can tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity much better. At this level, there is space between trigger and response. Your nervous system overall is functioning in a regulated phase, regulated enough that you're not reacting from survival, even though you might have at one point. You don't expect life to be painless, but you also don't interpret it as a personal punishment. And rationally, this changes everything, because in this state, you start to create boundaries from steadiness and love. You stand in the same room as dysfunction without becoming a part of it. You can be in very close proximity to someone else's volatility, but you don't internalize their projections. Their emotional state does not become yours, and you are no longer pulled into fragmentation just because it exists around you. That is being very close to the SQ score of 75, and you have no business trying to help someone heal if your own energetic wavelength is not close to that number. If you attempt to rescue or help someone from a low set point, you will re-enter your very survival patterns that you're trying to outgrow, and this will cost you your own stability. All I'm asking you to do is raise your SQ first, stabilize your system first, and then you're welcome to help whoever you want. Your wish, your dua that the other person be able to live a life of healing, health, and happiness, that is extremely noble and very empathic, and that is a huge strength. But you have to remember that this empathy without a level of containment is what gets you into trouble. You feel what they feel. And if you don't have a system set in place that will help you differentiate your state from their state, you will begin to rely on them for your regulation instead of being able to do it for yourself, and the whole operation will backfire. Very common telltale signs if you're in a position to help somebody heal is if their mood determines your stability, if their withdrawal destabilizes your sense of worth, you are not in a position to help them. And not only can you not help them, you're going to end up hurting yourself. You are destabilizing your own system that you've worked so hard to build. You cannot help someone while being controlled by their emotions, so stop trying to do so. If you try to be a rescuer because you feel sorry for them, because what will happen to them if you don't help them? Your own low SQ will make you susceptible to the emotional contagion. The most dysregulated nervous system in that space will set the ceiling for your nervous system, and you will lower yourself to fit under that ceiling. High SQ is access to choice and leadership, and this is where leadership does not mean dominance. It means self-governance. It means you remain steady even when someone else you're in a close relationship is not steady. You can choose when to engage or whether to engage and how to engage, and you can choose the outcome you want for your life. When you are at that level of an internal wavelength, only then will I allow you to consider helping someone. When empathy is not anchored in boundaries, it turns into hyper-responsibility. And in this world, hyper-responsibility is disguised as a virtue. Please stay clear of that as much as possible. When you're operating from a higher wavelength, that's when you make all of the decisions in your life. You can decide if you want to take up a job, if you want to get married. If you're already married, you can decide if you want to stay married or if you want to get a divorce. You can decide if you want to have children, if you want to move cities. When you're operating from a high set point, whatever decision you take will be in your favor because your mind will help you organize its life around that vibration. You're not going to be trying to leave the city because things are better over there than they are over here. You're not going to try to use your marriage to regulate your nervous system. You're not going to try and escape your singleness as though it is a deficiency. You're going to make those decisions from a very high set point being anchored in your 100% self-worth. In that state, you will know when to speak and when to stay silent. You will know when the feedback that you're being given is an invitation for growth and when it's your own insecure projection. You will know when to accommodate and when to hold your ground and what the balance between the two looks like. You will know when you're tired and need rest instead of pushing through, and not constantly working hard to prove your worth from a place of fear of being seen as lazy. You will know when your body is signaling overload and it's time to tune out. Instead of labeling yourself as dramatic, you will honor yourself. When your SQ rises, your whole life upgrades. And at that level, that's when your illusion of control dissolves. You stop confusing your love with an attempt of management. Because at a low consciousness set point, control feels necessary. It feels like if you monitor enough, if you soften yourself enough, if you were enough, explained yourself enough, maybe your relationships will get better. But it doesn't work like that. You realize that loving someone does not mean editing yourself into something more digestible and more desirable. It definitely does not mean preventing their discomfort. It also does not mean that you're carrying their healing process on your back. You are not their redemption plan. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to heal them, He is more than capable of doing it without you. The high SQ gives you the capacity to stay anchored in what you are capable of. It makes you discerning when you do and don't have the capacity to take on the other person's healing. You take responsibility for your behavior, your regulation, your perception, and you allow the other person to take responsibility for theirs. Without upgrading your nervous system, you might leave one painful relationship just to find yourself in another one with a different face or a different emotional structure, but the same negativity. True healing is changing the level from which you're available for a relationship at all. When that level rises, the lower dynamics cannot survive. This is also why you trying to fix another person always fails. You cannot reason someone into a higher operating level if they choose not to come there in the first place. I want to remind you guys that this entire Ramadan series has been about one thing: your consciousness set point. In part 1, we defined what that is and how we measure it with your SQ, the baseline from which you interpret life. In part 2, we explored how worship elevates that set point and regulates your nervous system. In part 3, we examined how unhealed trauma keeps it low and turns survival into identity. And today we saw how that operating level shapes every relationship you enter. When your SQ rises, your worship deepens. When your soulful intelligence rises, your set point elevates, your relationships reorganize around your coherence. And that is an upgrade in your life that I pray for all of us during this Ramadan. With that, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, elevate all of our operating levels, refine our perception, and regulate our hearts so we respond from wisdom. O Allah, heal what narrowed us and release us from the patterns that keep us small. Grant us all safe and peaceful relationships. Ya Allah, purify our nafs and allow this Ramadan to be the true upgrade of our inner systems. Ameen Ya Rabbil Alameen. Please keep me in your du'as. I will talk to you guys next time.